Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the GCNC World View. I am Chris Stay, co-founder of the Global Cannabis Network Collective, and your host as we tour around the world talking about topics that are interesting in the world of cannabis. And today we are going to focus a little bit on the complexities of different frameworks around the world and how it relates to finance and businesses that both thrive and those that struggle. And what are those different options? Because as we look at cannabis, we all know, I think, if you listen to us frequently, that there is no consistent approach in any part of the world, and especially not North America, for handling these types of topics. So I am really pleased to be able to welcome to the program today Dotan, Melech, and Scot Rutledge, CEO and CMO, respectively, of CTrust. I've had the opportunity to know both of them for quite some time. Scott and I have known each other much longer than we'd either probably like to admit, but it's a small world in the cannabis industry, and it's an honor to know you both and have you both on the show today. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Chris. We feel the same. Thanks for having us.
Of
Thank you, Chris.
course. Of course. And you guys are both based correctly in Nevada. Have I got that right? Or are we spread out?
Spread out.
Okay. So let's
Yeah.
hear the story.
Well, Scott is in Nevada. I'm in Dallas. However, Scott and I met first time in Las Vegas. So we have deep roots. I've lived in Las Vegas for over 20 years and built a business there. And I've acted as a receiver and a court-appointed trustee by the federal court in Region 17, which Nevada is part of, and had the pleasure and the opportunity to serve as a court officer in multiple states on the Western Hemisphere until some of the creditors decided that I should move to the Eastern side of the continent, and hence the move to be central in Dallas, which made it very easy from a time difference as well as travel time to get to the destination where the projects took place. But that's how we met. I mean, what was that? 2019, Scott, give or take. I was invited.
I think a
Remember
mutual
that?
friend of ours gave you my number, and I get this phone call from some guy with an accent I couldn't place. And he said his name was Dotan Melech, and I was like, okay, let's talk. And I had no idea what a cannabis receivership was or what the receivership was. And Dotan needed help building a team. He hired the firm that I was at to assist him, and our law firm stepped in. I'm not a lawyer, but I worked with the government affairs side of the office, and we built a thing together around that, and have been friends ever since. So yeah, I think that was early 2019 that you called me
Yeah.
out of the blue that day, and
Well, the funny part is that I just threw my name as a potential receiver in a case where creditors were looking for someone that has the skill set to take over a very complex, vertically integrated SSO, quite substantial at the time given the state of the industry in 2019. So
Yep.
I wasn't even the receiver then. I called Scott and said, "Listen, I'm not sure I'm going to be the receiver." If you remember that, Scott,
I remember.
but I think I'd like to have a plan in case that happens.
You
So
know,
take a
we
leap
want
of
to
faith.
I think it's great how people pull together over time these incredible businesses. And for a lot of our audience, I think outside of perhaps, an American football game where you've got receivers, people may not even be entirely sure what we're talking about yet. So I have the advantage of having seen some of what you're doing early on, and it's neat. As we were saying before we came on, you guys are now walking, and back then I think it was still sort of in the cradle, sort of rocking back and forth, hoping we could figure out how to crawl. And so why don't we give the audience a little bit of background on what it is that you're really doing? Because some of some of these words in cannabis are ones that when you get to them, where you're talking about receivership or bankruptcy, these are not happy words. Like it's stuff that is difficult for the business, but often is a lifeline for people to reorganize or to exit in a way that allows you to live another day and try at it again. But talk to us a little bit about what the concept is and why it's so important.
Of course, and I think the tie into receivership and bankruptcy is important to understand the genesis of what we're doing today. Because half my life, I tell anybody that's willing to listen, I've been dealing with distressed assets, distressed companies. Worst time, receivership and bankruptcy, as you said, are not happy words. When a receiver shows up, there is no party or welcome or red carpets. On the other way, everybody is running in multiple directions, and it's not good for the business. But given the fact that I've seen it for half my life, is what gave me the motivation, and you can call it redemption or you can call it something else, but it gave me the motivation to basically build something that prevents from receivership and bankruptcy happening in the first place. So essentially coming out from the dark into a more positive, more proactive approach and leveraging technology and a very deep knowledge of the team, the brain trust, as we call it, to build something that helps the industry grow and mature and avoid the pitfalls and the cost mentally and financially of going through those negative things that you mentioned. But not having, if you haven't seen that, if you haven't lived in it, you really don't know how to avoid it. So taking all that knowledge and all that experience and passion, I'm not just a guy with a funny name and accent. I also am on a mission, and I have a mission here. And we all do share that mission, is we try to help the industry by advocating for those that deserve to have access to better credit, better trade, better terms, because they do things right and they do it right consistently. And basically at CTrust, we have a technology and an algorithm that scores company where they're at today and also monitors their progress over time by looking at multiple business categories, right? We divide them to three areas: asset, structure, and character. But to use layman's terms, it's really the ability to pay, the discipline to do so, and the willingness to be compliant and stay a legal, compliant, and profitable, a thriving business is what opens up, if you will, banking, right, as well as lending from those institutions and better terms from the supply chain. There's no way today that I can see that kind of brings everybody together to have a good faith conversation around objectively around whether a company is credit worthy or not, or should they have access to all those benefits that normal businesses have. And this is not just a local Northern America problem. This is a global problem. And I think as the industry grows globally, there's going to be a greater need for that third-party perspective and analytics and data insight to make better decisions and do business with those that are essentially going to contribute and help to the success of that partnership as well as the industry as a whole. So I think the industry is ready for it. And the first 10 years is just a big scientific experience, if you will, that I think the R&D is over. I think we're done. Let's take what we've learned. Let's see where we failed. Let's leverage our successes, and let's take that and turn a page into a more transparent, more trusted, hence the name CTrust. It's not a cliche. We really live by that principle. It's trust you can see, it's risk you can measure, and allowing the industry to gain access by us being their biggest advocates. We want everybody to see it. It's not criticism. It's objective, transparent way to get companies to the table and have access to things that will help them grow. And that's global. Mindset is global. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. I was having a conversation this morning with some of our members in Peru. We're working on a trade summit this October 17th and 18th for those who might want to join us in Lima. And we were talking to some great operators down there. It's an expanding market, and they are looking to raise, actually, relatively speaking, a pretty small amount of capital. However, everybody down there also knows that the sins of past operators that have nothing to do with them are still very much driving investment mindset in that part of the world, right? In South America. And there is no particularly good neutral way for someone to evaluate whether or not their opportunity, other than me saying, hey, yeah, I know these guys, and look, they've got great books. I've seen it. There's no independent way of really being able to evaluate that. So I think it's great what you're doing. I absolutely see the global application, whether you're in North America, South America, Europe, Asia, or any other emerging markets. You know, Scott, as the CMO and a guy that came out of public affairs, and I've seen drive incredible change and policy in the state of Nevada. What attracted you to sort of take this senior leadership role with Dotan at CTrust?
I think probably the number one thing was having worked with Dotan as a client for a couple of years in that receivership process, but having had all of these clients in the cannabis industry, small businesses, larger businesses, vertically integrated, individual, license holding farms. Everyone had different reasons to be in the industry, and a lot of people that I worked with and a lot of my clients would say we're working as hard as they could to do the right thing, stay compliant, and working on this project where we saw how bad things could get. It sort of clicked, like, wait a minute, am I providing the highest value to something that I've believed in for a long time? I mean, I moved to Las Vegas in 2004 to legalize marijuana. We were unsuccessful in that. In fact, Jay Leno made a joke about that on the Tonight Show, and my very short-lived career in marijuana politics ended. And I went and I did some other things, and I learned some new tools of the trade, if you will. And when I was asked to come in and manage the legalization campaign back in 2015 for the 2016 cycle, it was an opportunity to, one, kind of finish what I started, but I knew that I wanted to parlay that into working for the industry, that I wanted to go from being an advocate to an advocate for clients. And there was this part of me, though, that wanted to do something bigger. And the more Dotan and I had these conversations about how could we avoid these sort of problems in the future, it became clear to me that any opportunity to do something like this that would be a much bigger scale was a lot more appealing. And I trust me, I had some fantastic clients, and I really enjoyed working in Nevada. But it didn't take a lot of convincing for me to go with Dotan and take this on. So yeah, I do view this as a almost service to the industry. I don't think it's a very obvious thing to say, but when banks start lending to cannabis businesses here in North America and globally, when they get involved, when they realize they can do it and how to do it, it changes everything, because that capital that's sitting on the sidelines doesn't just have to show up in the form of private equity, right? It can show up in the form of bank loans. And that's what we want to do is bring that capital to the industry. And so this is my way of continuing what I started so long ago, which is to not just legalize the plant, but to see this industry grow just like any other industry.
Yeah, Scott, you said that you went there in 2004 to legalize marijuana and failed. I will just point out you didn't fail. It just took longer than expected, which is often the case. Often the case in cannabis. We're always having to pivot and figure out how to get things done, and it never happens quite as quick as we want. But perseverance is a thing, and yes, we've certainly seen it. I've seen it all over the world. The kinds of stories behind entrepreneurs who really are willing to risk everything they've got to make a positive impact and a difference through the cannabis plant. It's something to see, and it's what keeps me going on a day-to-day basis with our members, because every single one of them is driven not only by the hopes of creating a successful venture, but also positively impacting the communities and countries that they're working in. So I appreciate your statement, Dotan, about being on a mission. And Scott, I appreciate your perseverance and consistency behind all of it. I think I think it's great. You know, when you talk about this notion of effectively creating a credit score type program of evaluation, there's not frequently a lot of transparency in cannabis companies. I've certainly seen some. I mean, outside of the United States, you know, there's more transparency on publicly traded exchanges that allow them, and others. But how have you found, as you've had these discussions, how have you found the receptivity from cannabis companies to be quote unquote scored? How's where is that at? Because cannabis entrepreneurs are not always the most open folks.
Well, I have to tell you, first of all, I got to say, if passion was currency, cannabis will not have financial problems.
That is true.
But I think at this point, at this stage of the game, trust is currency. And I think that if you kind of take a step back and say, yeah, we're looking for permission data, right? Essentially data that not only we can get access through partnerships like with GreenCheck, which allows us to look at some of the banking data that is being collected for the purpose of holding an account, but also talking to the CRBs and really educating them as to why this is something they want to do. Because what we're working really, really hard, and Scot is doing a phenomenal job, is we want to build trust with all sides, right? We're neutral. We're protecting the data that we're collecting for the benefit of the company that essentially seeking better terms, better access to services and capital. And it's their data. Now, if they don't want to release it, they don't have to. So the way we get companies to agree and work with us is because we're doing it for them. It's their score, it's their data, and if they want to expand and grow and improve terms and improve access to capital, they can give us that consent, and we can absolutely provide an advocate on their behalf. And for that reason, you know, coming in as third party, you know, we're truly objective. None of us have any particular interest in the success of one company or another. It's very data driven. Everything we analyze is based on input, and it's consistent across the board. So you're compared equally with the adjustment of the state, since we're still operating in silos, unfortunately. Every state requires certain adjustments. But we're very, very careful with companies' information and protective of it for their benefit. And so far, so good. We're getting great responses. We feel that the market not only agree with the need for our service, is also getting behind our mission and our vision that this is ultimately going to help the industry as a whole.
And Chris, you know as a marketer, right? When you're a new company with a new product, but here's the best thing is, but we're not necessarily a new company when you think about the people who make up this company, right? People who have reached out to Dotan over the last few years, lawyers and other investors and cannabis companies even approaching Dotan and saying, hey, we're having some issues. We're thinking about going into receivership. And Dotan would always say, it's the last thing you want to do, right? I mean, yes, I make a living doing these things, and I'm telling you, you don't want me there, right? And so I think people have found that type of response from Dotan. I think, you know, our chairman and co-founder, Bob Hoban, a lot of people in the industry know Bob and the work that he's done. People are aware of the work that I have done and the roles we've played. So people are somewhat familiar. Ted Robinson, our CSO, has actually worked in the industry, right, as a part of a group in Washington State. And other members of our team have worked within the industry, either worked for companies or some have worked with ancillaries. And so we're taking all that shared experience and knowledge, right, over 50 years when you put our team together. That helps us at least start with this conversation of, look, we understand what your industry is about. We're not coming at it from an outsider's perspective. We've been here, we've been in the trenches with you. So that helps. But it comes back to sharing that data. And as Dotan has said, you know, we can make all of the promises and commitments that your data is sacred, it is yours, the score is yours. It will continue to take some time to get the industry to warm up. And then the other part of that is, when I have a score, what can I do with it, right? And obviously access to these services from banks is what we think most of them will be looking for. But the application for this score and report, and Dotan has said this to our team numerous times over and over again. This is more than just about a score and report, right? And it's this business intelligence and information that you as a company want to know about your business, but how you can then interact in the broader ecosystem. So we have obviously some time ahead of us to continue to communicate that to the marketplace. But I do believe that as CRBs, one, start to see the positive results that come from having a score and how that has then transpired into access to services that they may not have been made available to them, I think we'll start to see more companies recognize that we are here to support them. And it certainly doesn't hurt that the score is free. It's no cost to these CRBs, right? We're not charging them for it. That's not how we make money, is selling scores and reports to CRBs, right? It's we're here to help them access capital.
And just because we always do acronym checks here on Worldview, when you say CRB,
yes,
you are
cannabis-related business, cannabis companies, licensed cannabis operators. CRB is our short speak, for sure.
Yeah, that's all right. They're everywhere. Acronyms are everywhere. It makes us sound smart, but then the rest of us don't quite know where we're going with them. So thank you for that explanation. I had a couple of thoughts trigger while you guys were talking. One is related to the mainstream Better Business Bureau, right? The Better Business Bureau is out there sort of creating scores for companies, right? Your A+, your C-, your all these different things. And having been an entrepreneur for many, many years, I've periodically ended up with BBB scores. But I also have acknowledged the reality that it's a bit dicey how they justify and create those scores. And the assumption has been forever that that's just a trustworthy organization because people have said it's a trustworthy organization for so long. But the truth is there's some pretty crappy companies with A+ scores, and there's some other companies with C's that aren't bad companies and have done pretty well actually in resolving things, but there's no real pathway to resolution. So you answered it partially by saying we've got people that have been in this industry and we know them and we've been in the trenches. But if people are looking at CTrust as being almost an advocate for them with the banks and helping to champion this idea, what separates sort of your background and expertise and history to really allow these companies to say, yes, I actually do trust CTrust with this responsibility? Because what you are taking on, you guys, is an enormous endeavor, right? You're championing the industry and saying you can trust us above anybody else to create a score for a business and help predict success or failure of said business if they're given money, resources. That's my words. I'm not trying to put them in your mouth. But, what's your response to that? Why is it such that you can take on this enormous challenge where others might not?
It's a great question. And you mentioned earlier that it takes 25 minutes. I think we need more time. But the bottom line is that credit and risk assessment that is not specialized, that is essentially across all types of businesses, is inaccurate. And we've done some market research in today's risk assessment and risk scoring and rating by other credit bureaus and credit agencies. And when it comes to business, it doesn't work. It's very hard to take, even if they're in the same block, a hair salon, a butcher, and a dispensary, and rate them the same way. It's very, very different forces. What makes us unique is because we are industry specific. We are specializing. We tailored for this industry. We're not coming from the outside looking in and said, oh, it'd be great if the industry had a third-party indicator. But that indicator means nothing if you don't know how to run the business. If you don't know the pain points that plant-touching companies have to go through. If you don't know what makes up a successful company and what makes up a failed company. If you don't have that perspective, it's very hard to create a trusted score And I think it's almost unfair to compare it to any other score out there, because they just use certain parameters across the board, regardless of what industry you're in, and it's not accurate. I would argue with anybody that wants, and that just piggyback on what Scott said. Look at the brain trust. Look at the people that are involved in developing and creating and making this possible. Because without having all those perspectives, I think it's very hard to develop or create something trusted.
Yeah,
that is trusted.
Yeah, I want to throw a number at that too, Chris. We have over 1,700 data points that feed into the process by which a score is determined. And not only is there a score determined through the algorithm, but we then came up with a way to create a confidence in that score, right? Which Dotan can speak to. So it's about not just understanding the industry, but knowing what data we needed to pull in across, and then how the relationship between all those data points, right? It's a very specific and technical process that goes way beyond what we believe some of these other credit rating agencies look at.
I want to expand, if you don't mind, on the confidence. This is important. Thank you, Scott, for bringing it up. Having a score in its own is kind of difficult to interpret, because what you want the perspective of the subject matter experts on that score. So what we did, in order to almost challenge ourselves, call it QA/QC, or take it or elevate it to a much more trusted level, by criticizing our own score, utilizing a process we call Kappa Index, and then benchmarking that score against it. Kappa Index involves live subject matter experts that have been veterans and experts in certain areas within the industry. So we're getting some input from the industry through the SMEs, so we can tell you with 90%, 80%, 70%, whether the machine-generated algorithm that essentially relies on data aggregated from the plant-touching company is of high confidence or low confidence. And we think that if you look at both, you really get a full picture of where it stands. So this was part of the evolution, where we talked about coming out from an idea, from a birth, to being able to walk and hopefully run and globalize, is building those processes in place that, by communicating and educating the marketplace, we believe the trust of the process is probably more important to everybody than the score itself. If you know how it's created, if you know the process that we follow to produce this product that you look at and rely on to make some decisions, I think you will have a better adoption and better response from the marketplace.
Yeah, well, and that's part of why we're talking today, guys, because the amount of due diligence that you have put into it, is something to behold, for sure, and it's robust. And I think, having talked to you about it at numerous phases, it's a pleasure for us to be able to talk about it and push it out to the industry as a whole, both here and abroad, because these types of programs take a lot of work to put together. And there's certainly plenty of folks out there who go, hey, here's 10, 15 pieces of information that make me cool and worth trusting. And they're cherry picked, right? And it's not particularly helpful to them or the investors, and it rarely works out too well. So I respect what you built and the process that you've taken to do it. I wanted to, second to last question today is, what's the receptivity been from the banks and the financial institutions as you've talked to them about CTrust and what you're doing?
Exciting. I mean, I can't be prouder of the team and the progress that we made. It's been overwhelming in many ways. We got some exciting announcement too. So we're headed to PBC next week, so we can talk with bank face to face and kind of provide some more perspective as to what our solution can do for them. And we think that banks are gearing up. The trend that we're seeing is more banks are coming online and bank the industry. I think the last number I've heard was in a 900 range. That's a huge growth from 2 years ago. I think is a 3-digit growth rate that we've seen recently. So that tells me that the industry as a whole and lending is the future. Naturally, when you get more banks coming in, cost of deposits will go down because there's more competition. So in order for banks to start making money in cannabis and really offset some of the cost of maintaining deposits, and have positive NIMs, essentially profitability for the bank, they have to start lending and have to start lending to the industry. And I think a lot of banks are at early stages developing policies, trying to understand how to deploy, who to deploy capital to. And we feel that we are very well positioned right now to help them go through that process. Utilize the score in many ways, incorporate it in the underwriting. We also going to announce, and this is going out in a week, so I'm sure I'm free to speak to that.
I'm going to rush it now. I'll push it out early.
No, we're going to. We developed an engine, a pricing engine, a risk-based pricing engine that banks and we're excited to announce after PBC for companies taking advantage of that too. But banks can go in and figure out how to price those the loans based on their internal margins as well as risk profile that they're willing to lend to, and every bank is different, so that gives the bank some flexibility to decide what works for them versus us telling them what you need to do, because that's not our place. But what it is, or we feel that we provide a perfect synergy there, is to align the expectation that the market may have based on their own risk profile assessment to what banks are willing to do. And if we're able to align those rate expectations, I think it's going to become very natural that in order to move forward, you're going to get your score and you're going to get started. You're going to get started with this program of consenting to being monitored, as well as open with your information. So I think it's a win-win. In my opinion, it's a win-win because the industry staying closed and in the dark and operating in secrecy most likely will not advance the industry nationally or globally.
Yeah, I find it's interesting because just anecdotally, right? I've started to get LinkedIn invitations and emails from bankers who are now actively saying, "Hey, we're in the cannabis industry in the United States," which, I mean, to me, I'm like, well, good. You're no longer a coward. Congratulations. And then when you go,
one way to put it,
yeah, well, I can do that. I'm the host. And then when we're in Europe and other places, it's much less dramatic, but they still have because they've been servicing, and it's not the same as in the United States. However, getting loans is still nearly impossible. Having all of those traditional banking services are unlikely because of the same issues. So while the United States has done a particularly good job at screwing things up when it comes to these issues, many of them exist in every market with every business that we work with. And it's great to see some forward process, and it's always good to see less cowards. So I'm glad that the number of banks coming into the industry and understanding that it is a profitable, responsible, sustainable opportunity is real. So that's great.
It's 100% real. I would say what you said with a little bit more diplomacy. Cannabis,
which is your job, Dotan. You should. If I was advising you on the other side, I would tell you be more diplomatic.
Yeah, I would say that it's a non-zero risk, right? That's how banks look at it. So are you kind of a zero risk bank, or are you a non-zero risk bank? But it's a nominal risk, because the likelihood of the government seizing assets of banks because they lend to the space is extremely low, because it will create, the ramifications are substantial. It will set precedent and create fear, and nobody wins. And it affects states in such a way that it may not be reversible. So I do believe it's a non-zero risk, but it's still non-zero. So not every bank is in that bracket, and not every bank depending on their exposure and their structure. But definitely 900 banks is enough number to show that the concept has been proven. Banking
Yep.
is possible, and now it's just naturally needs to move toward lending because it matured. It's there. You've seen the deposits, you've seen the financial activities, you've seen your borrowers that would be ecstatic if they had access to this. And the banks, in my opinion, should take advantage of it. And the ones that will go in early are the ones that are going to reap the benefit, similarly to how it was when the first ones started to take deposits, like anything else. So there's an opportunity, a window, and I think that banks are starting to realize it.
So my crystal ball question today, guys, to close this out. I'm going to project this out far enough that hopefully we're not debating rescheduling, descheduling, blah blah blah. So let's pretend like we're 15 years out, maybe 10, and we're looking at the state of business in cannabis. My hope is that we're no longer talking about 900 banks. We're talking about all of them, and this is not just a state by state or country by country, but we are talking the way the GCNC talks every day, which is a global economy driven by cannabis. But how do you see the state of lending and credit as it relates to plant touching, specifically cannabis businesses 10 years from now? Is this something we all are sitting around the table laughing about? No, we're glad we're past that. Or is this going to continue to be, even then, sort of an ongoing issue that we all have to battle every day?
Wow. Crystal ball, 10 years from now. I believe that if we do things right and learn from the last 10 years, the next 10 years will be great. I think we are at the moment swimming at the bottom. I don't know whether it's a slippery slope to keep climbing up, to start climbing up, or we're just trying to figure out, okay, what have we learned and how do we do it from here? I believe, and I'd like to believe, that certainly the landscape is going to look a little bit different from a value proposition in the retail production and cultivation as it stands today. Once you globalize this, you're going to start seeing export and import. And that's going to change the landscape, in my opinion, of cultivation. Once they open up the Schedule 3, open up trade under certain specific licenses and restrictions, I think that's going to change the way retail is operating. And I think that production today is underrated and undervalued. I think it's going to get more valuable going forward, and we will look back and say, "Oh, we should have thought about it." But I think you're going to see a different industry. I don't think it's going to be what we see today. I think you're going to see product more available, easier trade, easier to measure. Hopefully, cash will go back into banking, and people will do transactions on cards and checks and ACHs and wires. And lending becomes easier because the biggest fears that banks have is where's the money and where's it coming from? Right. So the cash aspect is always a concern. And I think we can solve for that. I see a better industry, but I do see a different industry.
I think we'll just a very abbreviated version of that. I think that when banks start lending, and they will, it's going to change the financial landscape. And once all banks are lending, or majority, you're going to start to see more institutional investment dollars also flow. And so I think lending, if traditional banks start lending, it's going to give a lot of other capital that's been on the sidelines a reason to start investing again. Plus, by using those banking services that aren't available today, it's going to open up a lot of cash flow for companies, and it's going to make for better investments. So you take just that landscape changing, just let's say in the United States, but then also, and I think they'll be using CTrust as a way to figure this out. But as you're talking about international exports, and if you are, whether the government of or companies in a country that does not produce cannabis but sells cannabis, and as exists today, and you need to know where is that cannabis coming from, it won't just be C of A's related to the testing. It will be, who are we buying it from? What is their score? Are they trustworthy? If we're buying it from them today, will they be there 9 months from now when we need to buy more? So I think it's the confluence of those two things that will place CTrust squarely in the center of where the global cannabis economy is going, because this is not an idea that is original. It exists in other industries. The fact that we are doing this right now before anyone else has launched, we expect that others will probably follow suit. There's more than one credit rating agency, right? But we think that this first mover advantage for us is really important. And again, as banks open up, I think institutional capital follows, and I think global cannabis trade commerce starts to look a lot more viable in that 10-year window.
And let me go up higher elevation, Chris, even above that. So think about a situation where we're able to analyze and have visibility and data insight for the entire market. Well, that doesn't stop there, right? Once you have that and you open up lending channels, now you have to worry about the secondary market and offering liquidity to the paper that was issued in order to continue lending, because banks are not going to, in my opinion, are going to want to know, okay, what's the exit, right? Like in mortgages, they package them, they originate them, they sell them, they service them. It's a profit center. So to be able to have that visibility will, in my opinion, in 10 years or less, I think in less, but let's say 10 years just for the sake of discussion, will open up that marketplace that ultimately allow the trade of the debt itself, which ultimately will further open up the liquidity and increase access to capital for the industry as a whole. And you can't get there without starting in the trenches with the companies, with the operators. You can't just all of a sudden show up and say, I'm going to do it from this height. You got to start from the bottom up. And that has been our approach. We got to understand the companies, the market, the regulatory framework. We have to understand the political influences, the economic forces. We have to understand that. So ultimately, as the advocates of the industry, it will open up other opportunities that will have better growth than we're going to see doing what we're doing today.
Absolutely. It's the method acting process of cannabis finance right there, you guys. So immerse yourself, learn it, and then make it happen. So you guys, I want to thank you so much for joining us on GCNC World View. It is great to hear what you're working on, hear how CTrust has evolved. I'm looking forward to hopefully crossing paths with you all in the next couple of months in person, where we can further fantasize about an amazing future for the industry across the country and around the world for all of us. So thanks everybody for listening to this week's edition of GCNC World View. If you haven't subscribed, you're way behind. Hit the button, do that whole thing. And none of us are terribly hard to find. You can find us on LinkedIn, all the socials, Google machines, if you want to hear more, and reach out to these gentlemen as they're continuing to evolve this really important sector in the cannabis industry. Thanks so much, Scot, Dotan, for joining us. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Chris. Have a great